Joining us is Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. She's a Democrat from Hawaii, a member of the Armed Services and Foreign Affairs Committees. Congresswoman, thanks very much for joining us. You're a combat veteran. You deployed to Iraq voluntarily twice with your fellow soldiers of the 29th Brigade back in 2004, eventually serving 2 tours of combat duty in the region. So when you see what's happening in Iraq right now, knowing that almost 4,500 U.S. troops died in Iraq. Thousands of others came back severely injured. Do you ask yourself, as so many other veterans are now asking themselves, what was this war all about?
Yes, Wolf, I do. And I think it's important mostly for our veterans, for our service members who sacrificed their lives there in that country, and for the American people to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes of the past and that we recognize and really look hard at what's happening on the ground in Iraq, recognize who our enemy is. We heard Secretary Carter mention the other day about how he recognizes that the Iraqi military lacks the will to fight, which is a good recognition. But the question that I have now is, will the administration actually change their current strategy, change their policy to make it so that we are actually making the primary recipient of our military aid, whether it's weapons, equipment, intelligence, the Kurds and the Sunni tribes? These are groups of people who have been proven, they've been tested. We fought shoulder to shoulder with them against al-Qaeda in the past. And now they have the will to fight. They are our troops on the ground, and they should be the ones that we should be providing our primary support to in order to defeat ISIS, because they have the will to fight.
Because you make a good point. There's the Kurdish fighters. They have their own separate militia. The Iraqi Sunni fighters, they have their own separate militia. There's the Iraqi Shia. They're largely backed by Iran. They have their own separate militia. They're all pretty dedicated. The weakest link seems to be the Central Iraqi Army, which the Defense Secretary of the United States says simply lacks the will to fight. Yet the United States keeps supporting that weakest link, the Central Military of Iraq. That's a problem from your perspective, isn't it?
Yes, Wolf, it is a problem for a few different reasons. One is, this is a strategy that's proven to have failed, not only recently, but really even through the Bush administration. When we had Maliki in charge, we were providing weapons and money and resources to this Shia-led government that persecuted the Sunnis, completely left them out, and really created the situation that we see today, where you have ISIS taking advantage of the oxygen that this policy has created, where the Sunni tribes essentially have been driven into the arms of ISIS for protection. This is the problem that I see with the current offensive that's happening right now heading into Ramadi. This is being led by the Shia militia, who named this offensive attack a name that is extremely incendiary and offensive, specifically to the Sunni tribes. So this is only going to make the sectarian divides deepen. This will make matters worse, and ultimately, again, this will push the Sunni tribes closer and closer into ISIS arms, at the end of the day strengthening ISIS rather than defeating them.
As you know, the Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, he told our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr, that the Iraqi army, even though they had thousands more troops in Ramadi, they simply lacked the will to fight a few hundred ISIS terrorists who came in there. Very similar, by the way, to what happened a year ago in Mosul, when the Iraqi army also lacked the will to fight. Today, Jen Psaki on CNN's New Day, she's the White House Communications Director, she offered this reaction, sort of a vote of confidence in the Defense Secretary and what he said. Listen to this.
Let me first say that what Secretary Carter said is consistent with what he was seeing and hearing from the ground, but also the Iraqis themselves had acknowledged that there were some command issues, there were some issues on the ground, and it's something they want to adapt to as well.
Do you agree the Iraqi army lacks the will to fight?
Clearly, the Iraqi army lacks the will to fight, evidenced by what we've seen in Mosul, what we saw recently in Ramadi, and many other times where they cut and ran. They dropped their weapons, the weapons that the United States provided to them and which have ended up in the hands of ISIS. We've got to look at the motivation. They lack the will to fight because they're fighting for this fictitious thing of a country called one unified Iraq. You have the Shia militia who are very motivated to fight because of sectarian reasons. You have the Sunni tribes and the Kurds who have been very motivated to fight to protect their territories and their communities and their families to defeat ISIS. This fictitious goal of a unified Iraq that this Iraqi army is supposedly supporting, essentially they're the army of this central government in Baghdad, not this country of Iraq.
Yeah, it seems like they're basically in charge of Baghdad, protecting the millions of people who live there, but not much else. At least that's the impression you get listening to experts at the U.S. Department of Defense and elsewhere. Congresswoman, I want you to stand by. We have more to discuss. We'll continue our conversation with the Representative Tulsi Gabbard in just a moment.